Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the employee engagement podcast that looks at how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Goram, and I'm on a mission to help more businesses turn the lights on behind the eyes of their employees, light the fires within them, and create tons more success for everyone. This podcast is for all those who believe that's something worth going after and would like a little help and guidance in achieving that. Each episode, we dive into the topics that can help create what I call stickier businesses. The sort of businesses where people thrive and love to work, and where more customers stay with you and recommend you to others because they love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay then, curiosity. If you've ever spent time around a small child, you'll know just how natural curiosity really is. Everything is a question. Why this? Why that? What happens if I do this or I touch that? What's over there? It's how we learn. It's how we make sense of the world. It's how we grow. And for many of us, that curiosity doesn't disappear, at least not straight away. We carry it through school, into early careers, into learning new roles, new skills, meeting new people, finding our feet. But somewhere along the line, especially at work, things can start to shift. Not for everyone. Some people manage to hold on to that sense of exploration and questioning. But for many others, curiosity slowly gets crowded out by expectations to have answers, pressure to move faster, or maybe a fear of getting things wrong, or perhaps workplace cultures that quietly reward certainty over inquiry. We're told to be decisive, to be confident, to look like we know what we're doing, and yet at the very same time, organisations say they want innovation, creativity, adaptability, and fresh thinking. So which is it? What do they want? My guest today believes curiosity isn't a nice to have or a personality quirk. It's a leadership superpower, and one that's becoming more and more critical in a complex, fast-changing, AI-driven world. Dr Debra Clary joins me today, and Debra is a leadership strategist, researcher, TEDx speaker, and former senior leader at some of the world's most iconic organizations, including Frito-Lay, Coca-Cola, Jack Daniels, and Humana. She spent decades studying what really drives performance, growth, and connection, and it's led her to one clear conclusion. The best leaders don't have the best answers. They have the best questions. And today, we're going to explore why curiosity sometimes fades at work, what happens when leaders lean into certainty instead of inquiry, and how curiosity can be protected, strengthened, and used as a genuine strategic capability and superpower. Debra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you here. What a fascinating topic on its own, just the curiosity. I mean, I have so many questions about curiosity, but I guess that's the point, right?
Absolutely.
Debra, will you do me a favor before we get going and start getting into this topic today? I've tried to give a little bit of an introduction to you and your background. You tell us what's really been going on. Explain. Tell us about your background and what you're focused on today.
Yes, yeah. So I have a bit of an interesting background in the sense of right after business school, I went to interview what I thought was going to be my first manager's role. I was so excited and like I was on my way. This was the trajectory. And they did offer me a job, but it was a route driver in the city of Detroit. So Frito-Lay believed that everybody needed to start on a truck, meaning start at the bottom and really understand the business from the bottom up. Mm-hmm. And I did that for the first 9 months and then spent a whole decade at Frito-Lay in various sales, marketing, and operating roles. But I have a deep appreciation from understanding the business at the beginning and understanding what does it take to connect with the customer? What does it mean to load your truck? And I was also a Teamster, so I was a part of the local union. And so I had an appreciation for what unions do. And then I was recruited away by Coca-Cola. And so I spent the next decade at Coca-Cola in various operating roles. And then I took a new role at headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was a global marketing executive. And that's where I got my experience in international and understanding that, business is done differently in different countries. There's different cultures in addition to language. And so it really broadened my idea of what the world was about and how you do business around the world. And then I went to the hard stuff. I went to Jack Daniels, and I was their vice president of strategy. But interesting enough, I was over their wine division. So I wasn't in the hard liquor, but I was in the wine division. And I learned about a new product, which was wine. I'd been marketing snacks and soft drinks, and began to understand the legislation that goes around how do you market and promote wine. But I gained a great appreciation for the vintners and the growers and the passion they had about the grapes and the terroir that went into actually making a beautiful bottle of wine. And while I was there, I got deeply interested in human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered what made leaders great and what made leaders not so great, or what made great cultures and not great cultures. I had this huge benefit of working for, Fortune 40 companies where they had really honed their leader development. They'd really honed culture. And I began to try to put my finger around, what makes that? And so I decided to go back and deeply study it. So I got my doctorate in leader development and org design. And when I finished that, I don't know that I understood human behavior any more than I had going in, but I had frameworks in terms of how do you develop leaders? How do you develop a culture? And that's when I went to work for Humana, one of the largest healthcare companies in the United States. And there I stood up their Leadership Institute. So we worked with the top 600 leaders in this organization. And the organization was moving from being a transactional organization to a transformational organization, meaning that they had realized that they were being very transactional with their clients, their members. And they said, we know that we have to begin to build a relationship with them and give value in different ways. And with that comes our leaders need to shift as well. So then I spent the next 18 years in leader development at that large organization. And then one day, my CEO turned to me in a meeting and he said, do you think curiosity can be learned or is it innate?
Ooh.
Exactly. And I went off and I did a little bit of research and I came back and I said, oh, by the way, curiosity can be learned. And he says, oh, okay, that's really interesting. And that was it for him. That had satisfied his curiosity in the sense that curiosity could be learned. But for me, Andy, that was only the beginning because I began to realize, one, there wasn't enough research on the power of curiosity in organizations. And I was just very intrigued by this hypothesis that could curiosity be the missing link in organizations. And organizations, they ebb and flow, they have growth and then they stall, and they have innovation and then they don't have innovation. And so for fun, I did this totally on my own because, I like to have fun like this, is I commissioned a group of MIT researchers to answer this one question. And the question is, what is the relatedness between leadership performance and curiosity? Was there a direct correlation? And of course, they came back to me and said, oh, we can ask this and we can ask that. And I said, no, I'd really like to understand this one correlation. And when we get that, then maybe I'll move forward on that. But I want to know the answer to that. And 3 months later, they came back and said, how'd you know? And I said, I had a hypothesis, having spent 3 decades navigating complex systems, having been in the midst of it, it was, I think this might be it. And once I got the research back, I said, I'm called to go share this with the world in a way that we can teach curiosity, we can measure curiosity. And we're not doing it because it's fun. We're doing it because it actually drives performance. And why are organizations in business? To make money.
Well, where do I begin with that, Deborah? Because you had me at human behavior, culture, and leadership, and then you chucked in that we can learn curiosity. I'm in. I'm totally in. And I was going to ask a really daft question because I'm sure I'm not the only one who listening to you can hear it. I mean, I think you have described to me previously that curiosity is your absolute passion. Was there a point that you noticed that it was that all-consuming thing for you, that it was the real driver? Was it on the back of seeing that first piece of research? Was there some other happening where you really kind of like felt it bubbling away in your soul now that this is my jam?
Yeah. So, three things happened in pretty close order for me that had me even begin to say, wow, we need a deeper dive. First was I was on a train from Rome to Florence, and it was this beautiful fall day, and I'm just taking in the scenery. And this Italian man next to me says, "Hey, are you American?" And I go, "Why, yes, I am." And he goes, "Oh, I've got the best American joke." Says, "What do you get when you ask an American a question?" I said, "I don't know. What do you get?" He starts laughing. He goes, "You get an answer."
Oh,
And I laughed politely in the American way, like I smiled and nodded, but I didn't get the joke. And so as I was spending more time in Florence, I began to observe Italians and other Europeans, and the way that they were having conversation was different from the way we had conversations in America. It wasn't just you ask a question. It would be, well, why is that question important to you? They'd want to understand where you were coming from that. And I just thought, well, that's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Then that next week I go back, my CEO asked me that question I told you. And then the third thing happened that later that week, Gallup, who measures engagement across the world, released their report. In the history of measuring engagement, they've never seen it so low. So I had these 3 points that began to say, what's happening here? And then I got the data back. And then I said, people need to know this. People need to know that what has happened to us. Now, you had mentioned that, as toddlers, we ask a lot of questions and then it gets lessened. And you think about as toddlers, a group of researchers actually out of London, some neuroscientists, they determined that toddlers ask 298 questions a day. Now you might be saying, "Come on, they can't even talk that much." It's like if they pointed, that actually determined that was a question.
Mhm.
So now what happens to us, right? We got 298 questions, then we go into school. Children are to be seen and not heard. Children are to be in their seats and raise their hand. Now my daughter's a teacher and she says, "Come on, Mom, we can't have mayhem in the classroom." And I said, "Yes, but I wondered if we've indexed too far."
Mm.
And it's in addition to that, it's how we're socialized. So, don't open Pandora's box, right? Curiosity killed the cat. So we are taught to be incurious. And let me pause there and just talk about curiosity killed the cat.
Mm.
I put it in my book that was released in October. And before, as we were doing final edits, the editor said, "Deb, I need you to cite Curiosity Killed the Cat." I'm like, "Yeah, my mother." And he's like, "No, no." And I go, "Well, Ms. Erickson." She goes, "No, no." So, I didn't really want to do it. She goes, "We take it out or you got to cite it." So guess what?
You cited it.
Curiosity Killed the Cat is only the first part of the sentence.
Okay, go for it.
It's attributed to William Shakespeare in 1589,
Mhm.
and the full sentence is, "Curiosity killed the cat, comma, but satisfaction brought it back."
Wow.
Nobody taught me that.
No, do you know what? I've never heard that. And goodness me, I have studied so much Shakespeare at school, and I've never come across that sentence. There are probably
Yeah.
Brits all over the airwaves here shouting and screaming at me, but I haven't heard that before. I mean, that
And
changes the dynamic entirely, right?
it does. So my whole point is how we're socialized, right? And then we go to the university and we become accountants or medical doctors or lawyers, and we go into the workplace or hospitals or clinics, and we are rewarded for our expertise.
Mm.
And oh, by the way, we have so much time constraint. There's so much we have to get done. It doesn't allow for us to necessarily be curious. And so for all of those reasons, we show up in midlife and being incurious.
Because that's why I wanted to ask you in all of the work we, I mean, we will come into what the book, The Curiosity Curve, has to say, and the framework particularly that you've worked on. And I'm fascinated by the fact that we can teach this as a skill. But why else do you think we've got this kind of dichotomy of all the things that both of us have said about what businesses need and desire, and in this world we live in right now? It seems obvious we need to ask more questions, yet at the same time, it's almost discouraged. It's almost given a performative permission. But actually, I mean, the number of times, I guess, as a manager and leader, ineffective at times, people coming to me and asking me questions when I'm busy, it's annoying. And I just wanted to kind of get them out and get on with what I was getting on with. And is that the sort of like context that you're seeing in business, and why we've got this kind of like weird, we want it, we don't want it thing going on?
Yes, you described the typical scenario in a business environment,
Mm,
in that the manager's in their office, the employee comes in, and they sit the problem on the table, and both the leader and the employee are looking at the problem. And the leader, like you said, well, I'm already working on something else. You're really bothering me. We are just efficient, and we give them the answer, and we
mm,
send them along their way.
mhm.
Now, is that efficient? Absolutely. But are you actually building that individual's ability to solve the problem on their own the next time? Have you built their confidence? And the answer is no.
Absolutely.
And so that's typically what happens. In a ideal world, the best leaders I know is when the problem comes and sits on the table, they don't look at the problem. They're looking at the employee, and they're asking them questions about, have you solved something like this before? What are their ideas that you have? And you're building their confidence that they can actually solve problems. Now, some people say, well, I don't have time. It's just going to be easier for me to do that. And I would say leadership is playing the long game, not the short game. The short game, you're being a manager. The long game is I'm developing people that could eventually run this organization or take my jobs. I'm developing people. And I'm going to go back to that engagement report
Mm,
that Gallup had released about the lowest engagement ever recorded. And so we pulled together a group of millennials because they make up a significant amount of the workforce. And they also are 65% disengaged. So big part of disengagement. Now, millennials are between like 29 and 40. Now, why are they an important group? Because those are the people we would be developing to take senior roles in the next decade. And they're signaling to us we're not interested. So we
mm.
pulled them together and we said, what's the source of your unhappiness? No, those are my words. The researchers did it in a more lovely way. But what they came back with was surprising. They said, my leader doesn't know me and doesn't care to know me. You're like, wait, that's so simple.
Mm.
And we're like, so when you say know me, does that mean like you have a dog and you like to hike? And they go, no, they don't know what I can contribute to the problem. I'm the closest to the problem and I'm least consulted. I'm told what to do versus getting my input. And I want to make a contribution. I don't want to be told what to do. I want to make a contribution. And I'm like, wow, those are things that leaders can learn to do.
Yeah, that contribution piece is coming through loud and clear. I mean, that's exactly the same in the UK with that particular age group, wanting to feel like I am contributing and I want to be involved. And the things you talk about here in questioning, I mean, that's the fundamental of coaching, right? When we're trying to get people to think for themselves, growing confidence, we're asking them questions. We're trying to show that they can think a problem through rather than smash their head against the wall because they don't have the immediate answer, right? And I guess in that process as well, the fact of not just giving them confidence, but we are reinforcing the fact that actually taking some time to think things through in as logical a fashion as you can, or maybe as a creative fashion as you can, is a worthwhile exercise.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And I think this is another thing about the tension between this short-term, long-term stuff. We see this friction in business across many different aspects, don't we? Even in culture for itself. Will I invest in really doubling down my efforts to create a great culture here, which means it will pay back in the future? Or am I just going to tell people what to do right now because I need a result today? And we see these tensions all the way. I'm really interested in this teaching aspect. So it's one thing getting a report that sort of says, hey, curiosity is linked to performance. There's no doubt. You can connect the dots between various bits of information from Gallup and all the rest of it to sort of say, look, there's a need for this sort of stuff. So what was the process of taking that genesis of an idea that curiosity is a good thing? It leads to great performance. So now we need to be able to teach it. Talk me through how that evolved.
Yeah. So when we were doing this initial research, I went out to some of the largest consulting firms,
Mm.
and there was three in particular, and I asked them, what do great organizations need? And they listed just what you would imagine. They need a vision, they need to be able to execute, that type of thing. And I said, okay. So we did our research, and I came back, and I was kind of boastful. I went back to all three of them and I said, well, you're missing something. You're missing curiosity. Like, look at our research, and you need to be talking about this. And they said, well, can you measure it? And I went, I'll be back. And so I went back to the team and said, if this is so critical, how do we know what current state is? And then how can we drive performance to improve it? And so we created a diagnostic tool. It's validated, and that people can take their assessment, 26 questions, and what's their current level of curiosity. And there are 4 drivers that make up our assessment. It's from exploration, openness to new ideas, inspirational creativity, and focused engagement. Now, it's wonderful in the workplace to know what your current level of curiosity, but if you want to maximize it, you take it as a team.
Mm.
And you understand the current level of the team's curiosity. Also in our research, Andy, we found out that a leader's level of curiosity impacts the entire team. So you see a curious leader, you're going to see curious employees, and then the reverse is true. So why this is so important is that you begin to understand those that you're working with. And just like any assessment, knowing self and knowing others is how we can create better relationships, trust, and then, of course, better performance.
Yeah, I think I was going to say that the two things in there's the personal diagnostic, the environmental almost within the team. And I guess this leadership thing of being given permission to be curious, to ask questions. It feels like a late question in this conversation, but what does curiosity mean to you, by the way? Have you honed a specific definition of that that's unique? Are you taking just a dictionary perspective of what it is? What does it mean to you for something you're so passionate about?
Yeah, if you look at it just from Wikipedia, the dictionary form of it, I mean, they define curiosity as being genuinely interested in self and others' situation, right? So it's you think about emotional intelligence, it's
Mm.
connected to that, and it's also what the millennials were saying is missing. I want someone to be interested in me. And so the reverse of this, let's take a look. As I was talking with an attorney yesterday, he's a litigator, a very famous litigator. And he says, yeah, I like getting people on the stands. And then I, start asking them questions. And I said, that's very different from what I'm teaching, right? I'm teaching a scenario where you're actually in a work environment and you're trying to improve performance in team. You're not, when you're litigating someone and you've got a witness, you're trying to get an answer out of them. That's not what we're doing when we're in the workplace. There's a very distinct difference. There is that you're actually, as an attorney, and I went to law school for 1 quarter and I quit. My parents said, why are you quitting? And I said, because they said, never ask a question you don't know the answer to. And I go, I don't want to live my life like that, right? I want to live my life in an open, explore type of a mode. And, the nuance to this too is, there are times you're in a crisis. You don't have time to ask questions.
Mm.
You need a commander that is giving the directions in terms of something that might have just happened. And it could be a natural disaster. How do you protect your employees? Or there could have been a huge fraud case or something like that. As leaders, you have to be able to shift into that. This is a point where I need to give direction so that we're protecting our brand, our company, or, our employees. So that's very different from what I'm talking about as well. I'm talking about in a normal work environment when you're trying to enhance performance. curiosity is your key?
I think this is what's really fascinating because, I mean, in some respect, some of the answers have been in previous Gallup surveys, because the number one reason why people still leave organizations is the relationship that they have with their manager, with their line manager. We've still got that huge drop off and tension within that piece, which comes back to just what the millennials are saying. Is not, but I don't think it's just them, in that having somebody that understands me, having someone that sees me, having someone that listens to me, having someone that backs me. And our ability to do that is enhanced or hampered by the degree to which we understand and know somebody, or how much we trust them, and how much we can be bothered to get to know them. So I think it all comes from understanding, which I think is amazing. So I think we ought to have a look at this curve, right? I'd love to understand. The title of the book is The Curiosity Curve. What is that then? So talk us through that, because I think we need to go there first before we think about how we can teach this stuff, right?
Mhm. So the curve represents like optimal curiosity.
Mhm.
So going back to the four factors of our curiosity is exploration is the first one. So you know that you're talking with someone that's in the explore mode when they're looking up and saying, "I'm wondering about, have we thought of this? Have we thought about that?" I mean, they're reaching out there to say, "What have we not yet thought about?" Right? That's someone that's in the explore mode.
Mhm.
And I'll give you an example of where I didn't have the language around this, but this was happening to me when I was at the Coca-Cola company. I had this lovely role called chief of staff, and it was a developmental role. So you get to work for the president, but you're getting to learn so much about the organization. And every Monday I would go in and sit down with Tom, and he would be going out here, let's about this, what about that? And I was writing it down thinking I'm meant to go execute,
Mhm.
or I'm meant to go research. And this went on for like 3, 4 weeks. Every time I'd go back, he'd give me new things. I'd go back, new things. And I'm like, I'm failing. I called the previous chief of staff and I said, "Man, I'm just really failing here." And he goes, "Well, what's happening?" And I said, "Well, I go in on Monday and he's like, has all these ideas. I write them down. The next week, I come back to give him some information and he's already on to the next thing." And he goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. Unless he asks you 3 times, take no action."
Oh, wow.
See see, Tom was in explore mode. I
Mm,
was in
mm.
executor mode because, man, I gotta show that I'm worthy of this role. So those are people that are in explore, and you can see where people would get, um, like I did, like, "Oh, I'm supposed to go do these things," versus if I knew he was an explorer, I would've when I left that meeting, I would have said, "Tom, is there anything you want me to take action on? Yes or no?" Otherwise, I mean, I was wasting time.
Wow.
So the next one is inspirational creativity. Now,
Mhm.
these are people that can take different industries or different sources and begin to put ideas together. So they might be saying, "I was reading the Wall Street Journal and then I was reading People magazine and I had this idea." So inspirational creativity. I have a former colleague, Dr. Joan Kelly. She was working at Yale Medical during COVID. And there was no answers, there was no playbook, there was no framework. And so she began to think about, how do I keep my patients and my staff safe?
Mm.
And so she said, "Well, wait a minute. The airline industry, they've got to keep clean air. How do they do it?" And so, of course, during COVID, airlines weren't flying. So there were executives that were available to have conversations. And what she ended up doing 2 things because of those conversations, and it became a best in class in the United States. One is, first thing she did is she put in new air filtration systems that they had not had before. They tapped on what the airlines were doing. And it did 2 things. One, it cleaned the air in a very different way. But two, when it kicked on, the staff felt safe.
Right.
Like it was a reminder that our administration, they're taking care of us. And then the next thing they did, like in airports, is they had kiosks. Hospitals didn't have kiosks. So she put one in the emergency room. So you would drive up in your car, you would go in, you would put in your information, and you'd go back and sit in the safety of your car. And when it was your turn, you would get paged, "It's now time to come into the ER," and then they would take you back. So that's what I was saying, is she took a different industry and said, how are they doing that?
Mm.
The next one is openness to new ideas. I'm sure we have all worked for leaders that have said, oh, we've tried that before. That's not going to happen. Someone that's open to new ideas and saying, tell me more. Tell me more. Right. So that you're really listening to what is it they have to say. And who knows what ideas that might spark to continue on the conversation. And the last one is focused engagement. And what focused engagement means two things. One is when I'm asking you a question and you're responding, I'm totally locked into what you're saying. I'm listening to what you have to say. And the second meaning behind that is when we make a decision on what direction we're going to have, you got to go focus and get it done. So that's why it's called optimal curiosity. If we are always exploring and not getting anything done, that doesn't benefit the organization. And so it's finding out this balance, and it's finding out the people that you work with, what are their curiosity factors, and how do you work well together?
Yeah, because it feels like we've probably got biases and preferences in our behavior, right, within some of these quadrants, some of us. And because I'm just triggered by openness to new ideas, because if I think about the work that I would do with behavior stuff and the big five psychological traits, openness is one of those big things,
Oh,
and that is
yeah.
about being accepting of stimulus and other views and all those sorts of things. And we're on a little sliding scale of those things. Some of us are bang up for that, and others are like, nah, not for me. And I wonder within this quadrant piece, in the research and in the work that you do with people, we've got preferences, right, about where we like to sit, perhaps, or we think we've got perceived strengths maybe in different quadrants than others. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. We have preference. So to be a successful, curious people, you need all four.
Mm.
Right. And all four can be high. It's just knowing when am I doing which of these activities, right? That's going to really drive the performance, my performance or the performance of the organization. And I'll give you an example. I was working with, it was 160 people within an organization. And within that 160, they had teams, right? So there was the marketing team, the operating team, legal, and on and on. And so they got their individual scores, and then they got their team scores, and then they got the overall organizational scores, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we put them into their particular teams to say, how do you feel about your score? What would we do differently? And then let's write an accountability plan. Well, the operations team, they were very high on focused engagement and low on all the other factors. And they were very proud of that. Like they were doing report outs. So we're really proud of that because, we are strict, we follow the rules there, and on and on and on. And it was I think the CEO who said, I'm wondering though, if we could be more open to how we could do things better. But they saw it in a very narrow way of, we're keeping the wheels on the bus. We keep the trains running for this organization, and we're very proud that we don't get messed up in these other parts of curiosity. And it was this sense of, having this awareness and saying, oh, maybe we could do better.
Just even perhaps seeing that quadrant thing laid out will be a stimulus in itself to expand our thinking or try something else, right? Do you see in the research, I don't even know if this is an interesting question or not, it's just popped in my head. Do you see any generalizations in organizations, in businesses, in the application of those quadrants? Are there stronger biases than others that are more normal?
I don't know if this will get after your question, but it might. So we have 800 completed surveys, and in those 800 surveys, we also have the demographics. So some of the things that were interesting to me is that there are no difference between male and female curiosity.
Oh, okay,
right?
that's good. Yeah, that's
Men
interesting.
and women are equally curious or less curious, right? But the thing that was interesting is the people that are most curious in organizations are those that have seniority, like they might be in their 50s and 60s. And I was going in thinking, oh, it's going to be the people right out of college, right? They're fresh with ideas. I really want to learn. It's actually the other end of that. Now that came as a surprise to me. And so we did a small focus group with those people that had that tenure, and they thought about it and they said, I think it's because I have a lot of confidence because I've been in the workplace for a long time. And I'm also I'm not afraid if you fire me, right? Right, in a sense of that, like we have security in that kind of that sense. So those are some of the things that surprise me. But when we look at the different disciplines, so like if you're in marketing or you're in finance, we don't see any differences. That there are people all over the map as it relates to their scores.
I love that. It shows it's just such an individual thing, and I think that that age demographic thing is really interesting. And if I just think about for myself, I probably feel like they've got permission to think rather than do all of the time. Maybe there's a bit of that within there.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Yeah. Okay. So we started this show saying, or you revealing, we can teach this stuff, right? So on the back of the curve, how do we go about teaching it? How do we go about educating it, helping people get better and stronger and more confident in being curious?
Yeah, so in the book, you'll find, significant amount of frameworks and tools and ideas to like that. But for example, it's one of, the best way to do it to begin to start is to take the assessment.
Mm.
And I offer it free on my website. So you can go and take that and you have an understanding of where do I show up curious and where do I not show up curious. But all of it boils down to one thing is, you know, curiosity is rooted in questions. And so going in and having this mindset of, I might have been around for a long time, but I don't know everything. I'm going to show up and I'm going to ask questions so I can learn. And I'm not talking about leading the witness. I'm not like I'm pretending to ask you a question, but this mindset of how might I better understand where this person is coming from? And so it starts with the mindset and then it starts with open-ended questions.
Mm.
And then it's listening.
I've just written down on my piece of paper as I'm listening to you speak, listening has to be a partner skill within the ability to ask the right questions, right? If you can't actually hear what someone is saying, or perhaps even interesting what they're not saying, how can you even begin to ask reasonable, useful questions for either of you?
Yeah. And what I remind people is just because you're asking questions and you're seeking to understand them doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. Right. I think some people, especially, around the holidays when you're sitting around with an uncle and you don't see him often, but yet he has a different political view or different view of the world. And you're each trying to convince each other that you're right. And so let that relax. And no one's trying to be right. You're not trying to be right. You're just simply trying to understand where they're coming from and have this appreciation for they have a different view than I have.
I think that whole premise of understand first before you do anything is a pretty basic requirement that we just seem to gloss over sometimes. We're so hell-bent on getting something done, we don't take a breath to listen and understand and then take the right course of action, right? Well, I think we've all been guilty of that. I wonder as well, we mentioned in the intro, the kind of chaotic, get it all done quickly now world that we're living in, and we can't avoid the topic of AI anywhere at the moment. Do you think that is having a negative impact on curiosity, or do you think it's actually fueling our ability to sort of ask questions and find answers? Just interested in your perspective on that right now.
Yeah, my position today is that I think it fuels curiosity. You think about AI does nothing until you ask it a question or ask it to do something. And then it comes back with something and you have this discernment to say that looks right or that doesn't look right. And you go back and say, I don't think this is quite right. This is what I'm looking for. So for me, it spurs my curiosity and it accelerates my ability to research in a short period of time.
I just wish more people would second guess what some AI is spitting out in occasion. We seem to, there's too many examples, I think, at the moment that I'm seeing of people just asking a question and assuming the gospel that comes out according to ChatGPT is the definitive answer on something. And I think the minute you start scratching the surface and realizing, and even really, is that true? Are you making stuff up? Because it's an aggregating model. It's trying to average stuff. I think again, being curious about what AI is telling you is also an important thing to do, right?
Yeah, that's where the discernment comes in. Like, so for me, having been on this planet longer than other people, in the sense that I have this experience to know that doesn't sound right or that sounds right, right? So, because I'm usually using AI for, business examples,
Mm.
and I'll say, that's not right. This one time I asked it to give me a case study on something, and it came back, and I'm like, wow, that's phenomenal. And then I said, I need to cite it. And it said, oh, I made it up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need to cite it. Wait, no, because also as a researcher, you always then go look for the primary research, right? So even if you're reading a book and it cites somebody else's research, I'm going to go look at that research. And then when he came back and said, I call him he made it up. I go, well, thanks for being honest, but I can't go to press with something made up.
Yeah, not helpful. Not helpful. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. Well, I do think it's an interesting topic right now. And I think there is so much more opportunity to find stuff out now than perhaps ever before. And the skill of curiosity right now, I mean, we've got so many amazing tools. If we are a bit more curious, and we can find out some amazing things, right? We can really do some good stuff.
Absolutely. I am taking a physics course. And my daughters were like, "What? You're taking physics like at your age?" And I go, "Yeah, it was something I've always been intrigued by." My brother was an engineer. He is an engineer. He talks about physics. And I'm like, I'm just going to go learn it for myself. I'm having a blast learning physics.
Wow. I mean, that's not a sentence I would ever say.
Mhm.
But it's fascinating. I just don't understand this. I'm just not clever enough. So I'm fascinated by those things. But our ability to find out stuff, if we just ask some questions today, is untold. And look, Deborah, I have been fascinated listening to this one topic of curiosity right today, and just how big and expansive it can be, and the role it can play in performance. And in a world where we're really trying to push for performance, it's such a vital tool. And I always like to try and leave the listeners at the end of a show with some practical advice, right, on how we make this happen. So I have this little element of the show called Sticky Notes, which is where I'm looking for you to give me your 3 best pieces of advice. And in this case, advice for helping leaders strengthen that curiosity muscle. If you could give me 3 little bits of advice I could fit on 3 sticky notes, what would those pieces of advice be today, Deborah?
Well, knowing that leadership and culture is synonymous, so goes the leader, so goes the culture. So you have a huge responsibility as a leader. And the one would be is set the intention of, I want to create a culture of curiosity. And by telling your team that that's your intention, that begins you on this journey of being a curious organization. And the next is reward people that ask questions. And the third would be reward those that try to poke holes at what's happening. Those that challenge the status quo, you need to lift them up and celebrate them and let them know that we are the kind of organization that listens to people and we want to know what's important to you.
Such critical leadership behaviors there. Thank you for sharing those. Before I let you go, well, I don't want to let you go, Deborah, but I have to let you go. Where can people find out a bit more about you, get hold of the book, The Curiosity Curve? And I'm definitely going to try and put the link to that assessment in the
Yes.
show notes too, which I think would be cool.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where can people find you?
So you can find me on my website, which is debraclary.com. I'm also on LinkedIn under that same name. And if you go to my website, you'll be able to take the curiosity assessment and you'll get your own score, if you will. You can also buy my book on Amazon.com. It's available worldwide.
Fantastic. Well, I will make sure all of that information goes in the show notes. Deborah, it's been an absolute joy meeting you. Thank you for sharing your passion on this topic of curiosity. I'm so grateful for coming on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy.
Okay, everyone. Well, that was Debra Clary. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about her or any of the topics that we've talked about today, including the book, please check out the show notes.
So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forwards. If you have, please like, comment and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Goram, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.